They fined me $150 for fishing in silence. So I emptied my savings, bought the whole lake, and told the entire HOA to stay out. My name's Oliver Grant. I'm 38, divorced, recently laid off, and until last month, the most invisible man in this neighborhood. I didn't throw barbecues. I didn't gossip. I didn't complain about lawn heights. All I did was sit by the lake with a fishing rod and try to remember how to breathe again. 3 months ago, I lost my job at a startup that replaced people with AI. The layoff came in a polite, 2-paragraph email. I didn't cry. I just packed my gear and walked to the lake. I hadn't fished in years, but it felt natural, like breathing after holding it too long. Each morning before the sun rose, I'd cast my line, feel the mist roll in, and imagine my life wasn't in pieces. I didn't bother anyone. I didn't leave trash. I didn't even catch much. But I guess peace is illegal when you don't ask permission. The letter came in a white envelope marked, Notice of Violation. HOA Emblem Top Center. Unauthorized recreational activity. Violation of neighborhood standards. $150 fine. No appeal. Just pay or escalate. I thought it was a mistake. I walked to the HOA office, calmly asked for clarification. The secretary smiled like I was a confused child and repeated, Lake access is limited to approved activities per Section 5C. I asked who approved those activities. She just shrugged. The man beside her, someone I recognized as the HOA president, Greg Whitaker, chuckled and said, Fishing attracts undesirables. Undesirables. That word stuck. I don't look like most people in my neighborhood. I don't dress like them. My beard's a little too long, my hoodie's too old. Maybe that was enough. Maybe quiet people make easy targets. Still, I paid the fine. I didn't argue. I walked home and skipped the lake the next morning. Just stood in my backyard, staring at it from behind the hedge. Birds still chirped. Water still shimmered. But it felt distant, like it now belonged to them. A week passed. I kept busy. Patched some code on a freelance gig, read half a book, tried not to spiral. But peace, when once found, haunts you when it's taken away. I missed the silence. The calm. I missed having something that was mine, even if it never truly was. Then, by chance, I overheard 2 men talking outside the grocery store. One said the lake was being foreclosed on. The developer who'd built our community never turned it over to the HOA. He still technically owned the land, but he went bankrupt and vanished. The bank was auctioning off assets, and the lake was one of them. I froze. Most people walked past the news like it was just another thing they didn't care about. But I couldn't. I went home and opened my laptop. The auction was real. Quiet. Online. Unlisted. Probably meant for developers and land-hungry real estate vultures. It didn't matter that I only had a severance package and dwindling savings. It didn't matter that it was reckless. Something inside me, something raw, told me this wasn't just about water and fish anymore. The bidding started low. I submitted mine. $9,200. A stretch, but doable. 2 days later, I got an email. You are the highest bidder. Congratulations. Attached was a property deed and a transfer date. I double-checked everything. Consulted a lawyer friend. No trick. No errors. The lake was mine. I didn't throw a party. Didn't brag. I printed a simple sign and nailed it onto a wooden post by the water. Private property. No trespassing. Then I sent a short email to the HOA board. Effective immediately, public access to the lake is suspended until further notice. All inquiries may be directed to the property owner, Oliver Grant. The silence that followed was delicious. It took 3 hours before the first email came from Greg. Then 2 more from different board members. Then a knock on my door. I didn't answer. The next morning, I sat at my usual spot by the lake, rod in hand, and fished in complete silence. No one dared approach. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I was the man who bought their lake. But this wasn't about power. Not at first. It was about dignity. I wasn't trying to be a tyrant. I just wanted to be left alone. But something strange happened that day. I noticed neighbors watching me, not in curiosity but in judgment, like I'd committed some moral crime. A few even whispered as they passed by. Their leashed dogs barked more aggressively. A jogger cursed under his breath when I didn't wave. That night, someone egged my fence. I cleaned it off in silence. Didn't call the police. Didn't retaliate. But something shifted. They wanted me to play their game, follow their rules, apologize for existing outside the mold. So I decided not to. I hired a surveyor, installed a new gate at the only entrance trail, set up 2 small security cameras, not because I feared them, because I wanted them to understand. You made a rule to exclude me. Now I make a rule that includes no one. Petty? Maybe. But sometimes petty is the only language power understands. The next week, I got a formal letter from the HOA demanding public access be restored. I replied with a scanned copy of the deed and a sticky note that simply said, "No." Their lawyers called. I ignored them. The president tried to negotiate. I declined. The neighborhood Facebook group lost its mind, and I didn't log in once. It became the talk of the town. The man who bought the lake. The outsider. The sore loser. The tyrant. Some said I was a hero. Others wanted me gone. I didn't care. I kept fishing. Because this time, no one could find me for it. The first week after I closed off the lake, I didn't hear a word from the HOA. No threats. No complaints. Just silence. That should have comforted me, but it didn't. It felt like the moment before a storm breaks, too quiet to be natural. And I was right. On the 7th day, I got a formal summons to attend the next HOA meeting. No agenda listed. Just, attendance required regarding recent unauthorized property actions. It wasn't a request. It was bait. I showed up in my oldest hoodie, the one with a rip on the sleeve, and walked into the clubhouse that reeked of lemon polish and artificial smiles. Greg Whitaker, the HOA president, sat at the head of the table like a man about to give a sermon. He tapped his pen, theatrically clearing his throat. "We're here," he began, "to address the hostile actions taken by Mr. Oliver Grant, who has, without consideration for our community values, closed off a public utility out of spite." I stayed quiet. They weren't asking for dialogue. They were setting a stage. Another board member, a woman named Marcy, always in tennis whites, always performing friendliness like a sport, leaned forward. "Oliver, this lake has served our families for years. You cutting it off feels malicious." I replied with the same calm I used when debugging code. "I bought it. Legally. Your organization never owned it. You fined me for fishing on public land, and now that land is mine. I'm not breaking any law." Greg smiled without warmth. "You might not be breaking a law, but you're violating the spirit of community. And the HOA exists to uphold that spirit." That was the moment I realized the entire meeting was theater. They didn't care about the lake. They cared that I made a move without their permission. In their world, everything needed to pass through their filters: how you parked, painted, or breathed. Independence was a threat. I stood up. "If you wanted access to the lake, you should have bought it yourselves." Meeting over. The next morning, my mailbox was smashed in. I replaced it with a steel one. Then came the anonymous complaints to the city, alleged code violations. My trash bins were unsightly. My hedge was overgrown. A neighbor claimed they saw me burning hazardous materials, which turned out to be me grilling salmon. Each report failed. But they kept coming. A slow, grinding war. Death by paperwork. I responded the only way I knew how, with escalation. I filed my own complaints. Noise ordinances. Illegally parked cars. Fence height violations. I knew the rules better than most. The same rigidity they loved? I used it like a scalpel. Then I submitted paperwork to declare the lake a private sanctuary. No motors, no noise, no trespassing. It passed. For the first time, they realized I wasn't backing down. I wasn't their stereotype of a socially awkward coder who would roll over when pushed. I had time, I had patience, and I had absolutely nothing left to lose. They tried bribery next. Greg approached me with a smirk at the gas station and said the HOA would cover all my fines, past and future, if I just opened the lake to community weekends. I looked him in the eye and asked, "Will I be fined again for fishing?" He hesitated. "That's what I thought." I left without a word. Then came the sabotage. Someone cut the wiring to one of my security cameras. A week later, my tires were slashed. I didn't tell the police. I didn't post about it online. I fixed everything, quietly, and doubled my camera coverage. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about endurance. Some neighbors started to notice. A retired Marine named Elias knocked on my door and handed me a toolbox. Said nothing, just nodded. A single mom I'd seen struggling with groceries left me a plate of cookies and a note that read, "Not everyone here hates you." That cracked something in me. Because I realized not everyone supported the HOA. Most people just went along with it, out of convenience or fear or habit. But when someone pushed back, it gave them permission to question things too. I started seeing quiet signs of support. Nods. Wave. Small talk. Kids began watching from behind their fences as I fished, whispering like I was some local legend. I didn't invite them in. Not yet. But I started imagining what it would mean if this lake, my lake, became something more than a battleground. Still, I wasn't ready. The war wasn't over. Greg filed for an emergency injunction, trying to force open the trail path bordering the lake. He claimed it had historical public usage and couldn't be restricted. He lost. My deed was airtight. Even the county attorney laughed at his argument. At the next HOA meeting, they pretended I didn't exist. My name wasn't mentioned, but the bitterness in their tone had changed. They didn't see me as a nuisance anymore. They saw me as a problem they couldn't solve. That was the turning point, because in that silence, I felt something unexpected: control. And for a man whose life had spun out from under him, that feeling was addictive. I was no longer the man who got fined. I was the man who changed the map. But that power came with a weight. I was beginning to see it in the way some neighbors hesitated when they passed by. In the way kids stopped waving. I'd become a figure of mystery, yes, but also one of fear. And it bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Still, I wasn't done making my point. I built a bench by the lake, one only I sat on. Painted a sign over the gate: private property. No exceptions. I knew it was harsh. I knew it stung. But I wanted them to feel it. Not just the board, but every single resident who had watched me be singled out and stayed quiet. The lake, once theirs by assumption, was now untouchable. And I was the man they had pushed too far. The man who struck back. And though I told myself it was justice, I was starting to wonder if it wasn't also something else: loneliness dressed as revenge. 2 weeks after the gate went up, the neighborhood snapped. At first, it was quiet rebellion, passive-aggressive notes taped to my fence, eye rolls from passing joggers, muttered insults when I walked past the community bulletin board. But it didn't stop there. A group of teens scaled the backside of the lake one evening, splashing and yelling, daring me to stop them. I didn't. I let the cameras record everything and sent the footage to the sheriff's office. The trespassing warning went on their parents' record. That got everyone's attention. The next day, Greg sent another email, this time sugar-coated. "Oliver, perhaps we started off on the wrong foot. Let's discuss a compromise over coffee." I replied with a single word: declined. They tried guilt next. A community-wide message went out, titled "The Cost of Division." It painted me as the one poisoning harmony, keeping children from the joys of nature, denying elderly residents their morning walks. They included photos of kids with fishing poles, elderly couples with binoculars, and a poorly lit image of me behind the gate, looking like some cartoon villain. It was all designed to turn me into the enemy. But I didn't respond. I let them talk. While they spread noise, I focused on reinforcing silence. I installed taller fencing around the rear of the lake. Not barbed wire, just enough to make a statement. I planted reeds and shrubs that naturally discouraged paths. I wasn't aggressive. I was precise. What surprised me was how fast the neighborhood split. Not just into those who hated me and those who didn't, but into people who started asking why the HOA had fined me in the first place. A few even admitted they didn't know the lake wasn't HOA property. Rumors flew that I must have bribed someone, that I hacked the county website, that I had political connections. The truth, that I'd simply paid attention when no one else did, was apparently too boring. Then came the bribe in disguise. A well-dressed couple knocked on my door, claiming to represent a group of concerned neighbors. They offered me $50,000 for a 10-year lease on lake access, community days, events, no changes to my ownership. I could fish as much as I wanted, they said. Just give a little back. It was tempting. Not the money. I had enough to live quietly for a year or two, but the idea that peace could be bought. That maybe, just maybe, this would all end. I said no. Because this wasn't about access anymore. It was about respect. They didn't respect the lake. They didn't respect me. They wanted control dressed up as compromise. After that, they stopped pretending to be civil. Petitions were circulated to change zoning laws. Fake environmental concerns were raised about my irresponsible stewardship. One letter accused me of dumping toxic chemicals into the water. It was absurd, but it forced a surprise inspection. The inspector laughed when he saw how clean the shoreline was. He left with a fresh bag of litter I'd pulled out the week before. That was the irony. No one had cared about the lake until it wasn't theirs anymore. I started documenting everything. Every interaction. Every note. Every attempt at manipulation. Not out of fear, but for preparation. Because it became clear they weren't just angry. I had disrupted their illusion of order. Greg led a campaign to create a new HOA subcommittee dedicated to lake access restoration. They started fundraising, talked about buying back the land through legal loopholes. The problem was, the loopholes didn't exist. I'd done the homework they were too proud to do. But the chaos had a cost. I stopped sleeping well. I jumped at knocks. I found myself scowling at the sound of kids laughing too close to the water. I wasn't enjoying my victory, I was defending it. And the more I defended, the more I wondered if I was becoming something I didn't recognize. I watched an elderly man, Mr. Rollins, walk past the gate one morning, cane tapping softly. He didn't look at me, just paused by the closed trailhead, sighed, and shuffled off. I'd seen him at the lake every morning before this started, binoculars in hand, counting birds. He'd never spoken to me. Never glared either. Just existed peacefully beside me. That image stayed with me. I found his house on a walk. Dropped off a handwritten note. Birdwatching welcome Tuesdays, sunrise to noon. Gate code enclosed. Oh. No response came. But the next Tuesday, I saw him through the fence, quietly counting birds with his notepad in hand. We didn't speak. But he nodded once. That was enough. Still, the rest of the neighborhood remained in siege mode. Teenagers filmed TikToks mocking me. A parent yelled across the road that I was ruining the neighborhood spirit. Even my old mailman, who once chatted with me about football, stopped waving. The funny thing is, I hadn't set out to ruin anything. I just wanted the right to fish in peace. But their overreaction had turned a fishing rod into a lightning rod. I wasn't just Oliver anymore, I was the guy who bought the lake. And to them, that title came with expectations. I leaned into it. I posted the deed publicly on a corkboard by the gate. Laminated. Stamped. Legally bulletproof. I replaced the old sign with a new one. Access denied. Respect is earned. Harsh? Maybe. But true. Then something unexpected happened. A teenager named Jacob, one of the ones who trespassed, sent me a letter. No apology. Just honesty. He said the lake used to be the only place he felt calm. That he hadn't known the story. That the HOA sucked. He asked if I'd ever consider letting him fish again. I didn't reply right away. But it made me pause. Because underneath all the noise, the hate, and the politics were people, real ones. Not HOA members. Not adversaries. Just neighbors stuck in a system that trained them to fear difference. I wasn't ready to open the gates. Not yet. But for the first time, I considered the possibility that maybe the lake could mean more than just revenge. Maybe it could teach them something they were never brave enough to learn. And maybe it could teach me something too. The first sign that something was wrong came when I sat by the lake and realized I hadn't cast my line in 3 days. I'd still walked out there, still sat on the bench, still opened the tackle box like it mattered. But I didn't fish. I just stared. The water looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. For weeks I had fought, guarded, defended. Now I didn't even know why. The silence, once my sanctuary, had grown too thick. Oppressive. I'd built a moat around myself, shut the gate, raised the walls. No one could touch me, but no one could reach me either. I had won. But the victory felt hollow. The neighborhood had stopped trying to fight me. No more letters. No more sabotage. No more legal threat. Just absence. They acted like I didn't exist. And somehow that stung more than their aggression. Before, I was the enemy. Now I was nothing. A ghost with a deed. I dreamed of my father that week. He used to take me fishing in upstate Michigan. We'd sit in silence, but it was never lonely. He taught me how to bait a hook, cast with patience, and listen to the water. Fishing isn't about catching fish, he'd say. It's about making peace with stillness. He passed away 10 years ago, long before I moved here. But in the dream, he looked right at me and said, "You stopped listening." I woke up at dawn, the sky still dark. I walked out to the water and watched the ripples. The mist rolled in like it always had. But it didn't comfort me. It accused me. Later that day, I found a letter taped to the back gate. No name, no address. Just a child's handwriting. "I miss feeding the ducks with Grandma. Please let us come back. We promise to be quiet. We promise not to bother you." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't manipulative. It was honest. A kid who didn't understand the rules, just the loss. I sat on the bench for hours after that, the letter in my lap, unreadable from the water's condensation. That evening, I pulled out the security footage and rewound. It was a girl, maybe 9, 10 years old, wearing a blue backpack and looking over her shoulder 3 times before slipping the paper under the gate. That did it. I didn't decide, I just moved. I took down the "No Exceptions" sign and replaced it with one that read, "Bird watching welcome on Sundays. Quiet visitors only. No groups. No noise." I left it and signed. I didn't tell anyone. I just unlocked the side gate, pulled the weeds off the trail, and walked away. That Sunday, 2 elderly couples walked the trail, binoculars in hand. One gave me a wary glance, but no one said a word. They stayed for 20 minutes and left. The next Sunday, 3 families showed up. Quiet, respectful, unsure if it was real. It was. And they felt it. No HOA, no permissions, no rules. Just decency. A week later, I set up a small wooden box with lake maps and a guest log. The first person to sign it wrote, "Thank you. This feels like a secret garden." Then something I never expected happened. A former HOA member, Mrs. Langley, knocked on my door holding a bouquet of sunflowers. She didn't apologize. Just said, "I didn't know the whole story. We were wrong. I was wrong." I invited her to sit. We didn't talk about the lake. We talked about her garden, her late husband, the way silence feels louder when you live alone. When she left, I stared at the flowers for a long time. I hadn't received a gift in years. I started thinking less about revenge and more about repair. Not with Greg or the board, they could stew in their bitterness. But with the people. The real people who had been pulled into something they didn't cause. I remembered the single mom who left cookies months ago. The kid who wrote the letter. The retired Marine with the toolbox. The cracks had been there all along. I just hadn't looked. That same week, I invited Jacob, the teenager who'd written me, to fish with me. He was awkward, apologetic, and grateful. He cast badly, caught nothing, and still said it was the best afternoon he'd had in months. As we packed up, he asked, "Why'd you let me come back?" I said, "Because you asked. And you meant it." That evening, I drafted a new sign. Not a warning. Not a threat. Just simple words. This lake belongs to those who respect it. Come quietly. Leave it better. I removed the cameras near the gate. Not all of them, but the ones that made the trail feel watched. I trimmed the path, cleaned the dock, and added a bench with a small plaque, in memory of every quiet moment. The neighborhood didn't explode with gratitude. It shifted slowly. A few people left handwritten thank yous in the log. A mother painted a stone and left it by the trail. Someone strung solar lights along the bushes without asking. I left them up. But the most telling moment came when I saw Greg standing outside the gate one morning, staring at the sign. He didn't try to open it. He didn't glare. He just stood, hands in pockets, and then walked away. That was enough. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I was trying to heal. Not just myself, but the thing I'd broken to prove a point. I still didn't talk to most of the neighborhood. Still kept to myself. But the lake had changed, and so had I. The gate remained, but it wasn't a wall now. It was a reminder that peace is something we protect not with fences, but with understanding, and that silence, when shared, is no longer loneliness. I'd built my fortress to keep the world out. Now I was slowly turning it into a garden. By the end of spring, the lake didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like ours, though no one had said it out loud. There wasn't a grand reopening or community announcement. Just a slow, quiet shift. More visitors came by, not crowds, just scattered faces. People who moved with care, walked with respect, and left behind silence instead of noise. I started letting kids fish again, one at a time, always supervised, always quiet. I kept the rules simple. No shouting. No music. No trash. Treat the lake like it's alive. They listened, maybe because no one else ever gave them something without a catch. Jacob came back with 2 friends. I didn't turn them away. I handed each a pole, showed them how to bait a hook, and let them sit beside me on the dock. One of them asked, "Why do you let us come when most grown-ups just say no?" I told them the truth. Because someone needs to show you what peace looks like before the world convinces you it's a weakness. They didn't understand the full meaning, but they nodded like they wanted to. That was enough. Word got around. Not through flyers, not through apps, just whispers, invites, curiosity. A young woman with a walking stick came by one afternoon. She didn't ask for help. She just walked to the bench, sat down, and stayed for 2 hours. When she left, she signed the guest log with a quote, "This is the first place I've felt safe in a long time." That was the day I realized the lake wasn't just a body of water anymore. It was becoming a sanctuary. Not from noise, but from judgment. From the invisible weight people carry when they feel they don't belong. I added a second bench near the willow tree and labeled it, "Reflection Only." No phones, no talking. Just space. A man in his 60s started coming every Friday afternoon. He never spoke. Just nodded once when we passed each other. One evening, he left a note in the box. "I used to come here with my son before the divorce. Thank you for giving me back something I thought I'd lost." I didn't expect to cry when I read that. But I did. Because I understood it too well. I had spent so long turning pain into walls, I forgot what it felt like to let people in gently. Not with a speech. Just with presence. The changes kept coming. A woman named Anita, who ran a local tutoring group, asked if she could bring a few kids by once a week for nature journaling. I asked how many. She said 6. I said yes. I set up a shaded spot near the east edge with log stools and small tables. They arrived the next week, wide-eyed and fidgety, but respectful. One of them, A boy who barely spoke, left behind a drawing in the logbook. It was of me, sitting on the dock with a fishing pole, surrounded by ducks and dragonflies. Underneath, he wrote, "This is Mr. Lake. He lets us be quiet." I didn't even know his name. I started volunteering time to teach the kids basic coding, once a week in my garage. Nothing big. Just a laptop and lessons on logic and curiosity. I called it debugging the world. They laughed, but they kept showing up. And for the first time in years, I remembered what purpose felt like. Not productivity. Not deadlines. Just purpose. Some of the same people who had once stood against me now dropped by with questions, updates, offers to help. Not all of them. Not Greg. But some. Enough. I didn't forget what they did. But I didn't punish them for it either. Not anymore. I saw what fear did to people. And I was done adding to it. I met with Elias again, the retired Marine. He brought tools and helped fix up the small boathouse on the far edge. Said it felt good to build something again. We didn't talk much, but when we did, it was always real. No small talk. Just life. He told me, places like this don't last unless someone protects them. But they also don't grow unless you trust people a little. That stuck. I removed the old gate entirely and replaced it with an open archway covered in ivy. The sign changed again. This place runs on trust. Don't be the reason it closes. Some said I was naive. That people would ruin it. That it would only take one group to leave it trashed or loud or broken. But they were wrong. Respect grows when it's modeled. When it's lived. People rose to the standard not because I enforced it, but because I believed they could. One afternoon, a woman approached me and said her father used to fish on this lake before she was born. She brought a photo of him from the 80s, standing in front of the willow tree. I recognized the background. I'd stood there dozens of times. We framed the photo and mounted it on a post beside the dock with the words, "Legacy lives in stillness." That was when I understood what we were building. Not a park. Not a rebellion. A legacy. A new way of being together. Without committees. Without bylaws. Without judgment. Just a shared agreement to care. It was slow, imperfect, and fragile. But it was working. And through it all, I was changing too. My anger didn't disappear, but it stopped steering me. My walls didn't vanish, but I learned where the door should go. I didn't need to be the man who bought the lake out of spite anymore. Now I was the man who opened it with purpose. And that felt like something worth becoming. By midsummer, the neighborhood didn't just accept the lake. They depended on it. What once symbolized defiance now breathed connection. People came not for escape, but for meaning. And I watched it happen, one quiet act at a time. The logbook was filled weekly now. Not just names, but gratitude. Stories. Questions. Drawings. One entry read, "This place healed our family. We were falling apart until we had somewhere to just be still." Another, "This lake saved my sobriety. No one judged me here." I read every page, every note. Sometimes I replied. Most of the time, I didn't need to. Presence was enough. One evening, I met a teacher named Marco. He asked if he could bring his students for a unit on ecosystems. I asked how many. He said 10, spaced out over a week, respectful and quiet. I told him yes, but with one condition: they each leave behind something, an insight, a question, a moment. He smiled and said, "Deal." That same week, I held a meeting. Not an HOA meeting, not official, just a gathering. Word spread through whispers, emails, and messages written on chalkboards. I didn't want hierarchy. I wanted people. 35 neighbors showed up. Some I recognized, others I'd never met. They brought picnic blankets, folding chairs, notepads. They expected a speech. I gave them silence. Let the lake speak first. When the wind settled and the hush felt natural, I simply said, "We can build something different here. Not controlled. Not enforced. Just shared." People nodded. Some cried. Not from sadness, but from the realization that no one had ever asked them to co-create peace before. We called it the Lakeside Trust. Not an organization, not a board, just a loose community agreement to keep this place sacred, open, humble, respected. We agreed on principles, not rules. Respect, quiet, leave no trace, include others, lift each other. If someone broke those, they weren't punished, they were talked to, taught, heard. It worked. The community changed. People started taking initiative. Someone installed a lending library beside the dock. Waterproof, handmade, full of nature books and memoirs. A father-son duo built a floating duck platform from scrap wood and launched it one morning without fanfare. A high school girl painted stones with messages like, "You belong," and "Stillness is a strength," and placed them along the trail. No one asked permission. They didn't need to. The same HOA that once tried to control every inch of grass now watched from the sidelines. Greg never came back. Not once. Word was he'd quietly stepped down, citing personal reasons. I didn't celebrate. I didn't mock him. I just hoped he saw what grew in the space where control had once choked everything. One woman, Tamara, a nurse, started hosting grief circles by the water on Saturday mornings. No advertising, no charge. Just space for people who'd lost someone to sit together. I watched from a distance sometimes, hearing nothing but the breeze and the occasional sniffle. That kind of silence is sacred. No walls. Just presence. Elias helped me build a small pavilion at the east edge. We called it the listening place. No events. No noise. Just a spot for sitting, thinking, listening. One day, a man wrote in the logbook, "I sat here and forgave my brother after 10 years. He's gone now. But I finally let go." That's the kind of legacy we were leaving behind. Kids grew up beside the lake, not above it. They learned to observe first, act second. They picked up litter that wasn't theirs. They taught each other how to tie fishing knots and identify bird calls. I watched Jacob grow from a kid who trespassed into a young man who taught others. He started mentoring new visitors, showing them the ropes with gentle guidance. "Mr. Lake showed me," he'd say with a smile. I hadn't heard that nickname in months. It warmed me more than I expected. I expanded the education program. Not formally. Just Saturday afternoon sessions under the willow. We talked about logic, empathy, systems, and stillness. The kids asked big questions. What does peace mean? Why are adults afraid to change? I didn't always have answers. But I gave them the space to wonder. One boy asked, "Do you think grown-ups can grow up again?" I said yes, because I had. I wasn't the same man who marched into that auction to prove a point. I wasn't the man who built walls and scowled from behind gates. I was learning too. Slower than some. But steady. There were still missteps. A loud group once threw a birthday party at the lake. Balloons, music, shouting. It broke the silence like a hammer. I walked up and simply said, "We do things differently here. Want to try again next week?" They apologized. Came back with quiet games, a picnic, and handwritten thank you cards for the space. That's what leadership looked like now. Not policing, guiding. Not punishing, inviting. Not control, trust. I kept a quiet tally in my head. Not of visitors or violations, but of transformations. How many people had this place helped remember themselves? How many carried it into their daily lives, into their homes, their jobs, their choices? I'd never know the exact number. But I knew it was growing. One woman approached me at sunset and said, "This is what I always hoped community could be, but never thought was possible." I didn't say anything. Just nodded. Because I once believed the same thing. Now I knew better. It doesn't take committees or bylaws or authority to build something good. It takes listening. It takes letting go. It takes the courage to trust people before they've earned it, because most never get the chance. The lake had become our teacher. And we had become its students. Quietly. Steadily. Together. The lake taught me how to let go, but the people taught me how to begin again. It started small. A little boy named Ray had been coming to the lake with his grandmother every Friday. He always wore headphones, kept to himself, rarely spoke. One afternoon, I noticed him watching me bait a hook. I offered him a pole. He didn't answer, just stepped closer. His grandmother mouthed, "He doesn't talk much." I handed him the rod anyway. He caught nothing that day, but he stayed. And the next Friday, he came early, already waiting by the dock. The third Friday, he brought his own pole. By the fifth, he said, quietly, "This is the best place in the world." I didn't need applause. I didn't need thanks. That one sentence carried more weight than any award ever could. What we were building here, it wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was changing lives. I saw it in the way people moved. They slowed down. They noticed things. The dragonflies over the reeds. The ripple of a frog's leap. The reflection of a sunrise. Before the lake, I had spent years sprinting toward achievement, chasing validation. Here, stillness itself was the lesson. I was no longer the man who had been laid off and humiliated. I was no longer the guy who turned his pain into fences. I was someone who had learned how to listen, how to lead without control, and how to offer space instead of judgment. People began bringing others, not to show off the lake, but to share it. "You need to see this place," they'd whisper. And they were right. We had created something rare, a space that didn't demand change but allowed it to happen on its own. I began holding monthly evening gatherings called Reflections. Not meetings, no agendas, just a circle under the stars where anyone could speak or stay silent. We'd sit in lawn chairs or on blankets, the lake behind us, the night air thick with stories. People cried. People laughed. Some just listened. Each time, someone would say, "I didn't know others felt like I did." The truth was, we all did. Lost. Tired. Yearning for something real. The HOA still technically existed, but it was irrelevant now. People followed different leadership, quiet leadership. Not based on fear or fines, but mutual respect. When someone made a mistake, we corrected with care. If someone littered, another picked it up without scolding. That was the difference. Not perfection, but collective accountability. Even Greg, who once had tried to break me, returned. Not as a leader. Just a man. He walked the trail alone, avoided eye contact, and kept moving. But one day, he left a note in the box. I thought power meant control. I see now it can also mean trust. "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. He knew. I began mentoring again, this time not through tech or formal teaching, but through presence. I guided teens who wanted to learn how to lead quietly. Showed them how to handle tension with compassion, how to notice needs before complaints arose. We talked about empathy, about the courage it takes to forgive even when no one asks for it. These weren't lessons found in textbooks, they were carved from experience. Some of them called it the Lake School. I didn't argue. If it gave them pride, it was already a success. One of the older kids, Jordan, asked to organize a day of gratitude. No speeches. Just everyone leaving behind something kind. Note. Stones. Handmade tokens. That Saturday, over 100 people came throughout the day. They wrote poems, sang quiet songs, made art from fallen branches. At sunset, they left a small wooden sculpture in the shape of a heart by the trail. It said, "For the man who bought a lake, and gave us back something greater." I stood there long after everyone left. I read every note. I touched every stone. For someone who once thought solitude was the only safe space, that moment cracked me open in ways I hadn't expected. Not because of the attention, but because it proved healing didn't mean erasing pain. It meant transforming it into something someone else could hold. That's what this lake had become, a container for transformation. A reflection of what could be, when ego is removed, and community is invited in. The man who once fought to be left alone was now building bridges daily. But not by pushing, not by demanding. Just by offering something real and waiting patiently for others to see it. Eventually, I started looking beyond the lake. partnered with nearby communities to show how trust-based spaces could work, gave talks, quiet ones, not about rules or structures, but about humility and service, told my story not as a hero, but as someone who had learned the hard way that revenge, no matter how justified, could only take you so far. Redemption, though, that could go much further. The lake never stopped being mine, technically. But in every way that mattered, it became everyone's. Not because they took it, but because I chose to share it. And in sharing it, I found myself again. I began writing essays, reflections, little stories from the trail. Not for fame, for clarity. Some got published, some didn't. But people read them and they wrote back. This helped me understand my own anger. I didn't realize I was trying to control everything out of fear. I shared this with my daughter, and we finally talked for the first time in months. That became my new measure of success. How many silent conversations my story could spark. The lake gave me space to break down. Then it gave me the strength to rebuild. But it was the people who gave me the courage to stay soft in a world that rewarded hardness. I had once thought being strong meant being untouchable. Now I knew it meant being reachable. This journey started with a fishing rod and a fine. It ended with a legacy. Not one carved in marble. One written in gestures, glances, trust. I didn't change the world. But I changed one neighborhood. And maybe that's how the world changes. One healed wound at a time. One quiet lake at a time. One person deciding that forgiveness matters more than victory. I was never just the man who bought the lake. I became the man who opened it. And in doing so, opened everything else.